The project I'm going to talk about is Semantic MEDLINE, and it is a web application which enables semantic processing for biomedical knowledge discovery. So many of you are familiar with this. So to give an overview of the entire talk, really at the core of what I'm doing is building on National Library of Medicine resources with the goal of providing enhanced access to biomedical tech. So what we want to do, exactly as George was saying, is to provide the technology for innovative information processing applications, and we've started with the research literature in biomedicine. I'm confident, I'll say the last point here, that this can be extended to other genres of text and other domains, but the core right now is what I'll talk about is interpreting this text as semantic predications. And I mean, this may be a little bit technical, loved by linguists, but we'll get the details of exactly what a semantic predication is and why it's significant, because it sort of normalizes and constrains, in a sense, interprets meaning so that you end up with something that is really computable knowledge. You sort of you have tamed the nastiness and hairiness of text when you have interpreted, and of language, and when you have interpreted something as a semantic predication. So I want to say just a few words about the biomedical text that I'm currently processing. Many of you may be familiar with this, but the details you may not know which. So MEDLINE has more than 23 million biomedical journal citations. They have been indexed since about the 1940s, but they are constantly putting in older versions back to the late 19th century. So we're most concerned about the title and the abstract of a publication, and there is mesh indexing, which you will see, it does play a part in this whole processing. So exactly, again, as George was saying, I mean, MEDLINE provides a comprehensive repository of biomedical knowledge. I don't think there's anything comparable to it in the world. But, you know, access is another thing. So it's currently provided really in the standard of all text retrieval systems. It's PubMed. It has a technology which is, you know, it's really just like Google. It was something introduced in the 1980s, really. And its main characteristic is that it manipulates text tokens without knowing what they mean. I mean, it just looks at them as strings of letters. And so what Semantic MEDLINE adds to this is semantic processing, and a little bit of, without going into philosophy of linguistics or formal linguistics, what does that really sort of mean? It means that you manipulate information, not just the documents themselves. So this really bridges the gap between language, that is the text, and what you really mean. So that's really one of the core issues in current information management science, making any progress. I mean, we have lots of machines, we have lots of ways of getting actually documents, but I mean, put it one way, once you get them, you're on your own about, you know, doing something with them. The system doesn't do anything. So again, I'll mention the core aspect of semantic processing is producing this computable representation of meaning, which is a semantic predication, and its core feature is that it allows more effective access to meaning. Doesn't totally process meaning, but it's a lot better than just tokens. And so the system that I'll describe and demo today is called, as George mentioned, Semantic MEDLINE, and it has these characteristics. So it doesn't, it sits on top of PubMed and MEDLINE, if you will. And so it takes full advantage of what already is in PubMed and the retrieval system to extract documents. So it first brings back MEDLINE citations. Now, two programs I'm really going to talk about, and they're sort of close. Maybe I don't want to be confusing, but Semantic MEDLINE is a web application, a Java program that that sort of manages everything that needs to be done in this whole process. SEMREP is sort of a more esoteric program. It's a natural language processing program. It stands for semantic representation that does the actual extraction of the predications. So you extract the predications and then you manipulate them is the thing. And SEMREP does the extracting and Semantic MEDLINE does the manipulation. So these are extracted from text that has been returned to you a query to PubMed, and then the semantic predications that are extracted are summarized, because that's part of the problem. People talk about the information tsunami and being overwhelmed with too much information. We need summaries of stuff. I mean, and you need sort of a guide to going into more depth if you want to, but no way can you process all of the information that's available to you today online. And I mean, summarization, I mean, a little bit of aside, I mean, it's something like the way the brain works in perception. I mean, you know, the brain takes in all sorts of physical input, but the subconscious sort of filters this out and really summarizes it and makes available to you only a small amount of the actual physical input that you take in anytime you're awake. So summarization is crucial. And then it is provided, the information is provided to you as a graph, really, not as a long list of predications, but as a sort of a picture summarizing the core ideas in the text that you're interested in. And we'll see this in more detail. So, yes.
Is it worth saying anything about UMLS at this point?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, George, you're anticipating
that?
I believe it's the very next slide.
Very good.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, we talk about information management, and today I'm going to talk about one particular aspect of that, really in scientific discovery and managing the research literature, which is, of course, a specialized version of what you can do with information. But here we come with the UMLS, George. So, at the core, SEMREP is the natural language processing system that extracts predications. So, we'll go around this whole process several times with sort of more detail, but imagine that you have thrown at you a lot of text from, say, a Medline search or a Google search, and it really has this characteristic. I mean, you can't read it unless, I mean, all at once. You have to sort of bore down. So what SEMREP does is it goes sort of sentence by sentence. Although this isn't really quite a complete sentence, it's a complete assertion. So exemestane after non-steroidal aromatase inhibitor for postmenopausal women with advanced breast cancer. And here is a semantic predication representing part of the meaning of that text. And you see it has sort of three components, two arguments, the boxes on the outside, and then a relationship or a predicate in the middle. And before we talk about what it can do for you, I mean, the thing is, it is crucial for a semantic predication that it be mapped to some representation of some world, I mean, an ontology, if you will. And in this case, Semantic MEDLINE maps to the UMLS. So the concepts, the arguments, the things are mapped to the metathesaurus, and the relation, the predicate, is mapped to the semantic network. All of these are parts of the UMLS. And so I always emphasize that you're not doing semantics, and this is like, you know, salesmen can tell you they are, you're not doing semantics unless you map the text to some kind of a representation of some world. In this case, you know, we call it, the UMLS really wasn't designed as an ontology, but it's very comprehensive in the medical domain, and it represents a pretty good sort of structure of an ontology. Really is what do people in the field accept as being the truth. I mean, whether it isn't the truth is not something we can answer, but it's pretty much accepted, for example, that, I mean, this metathesaurus concept is a drug, and that drugs treat breast carcinoma, which is a disorder, so that, you know, people accept that. So I just point out a little bit of what this does for you in the normalization or the kind of the disciplining, if you will, the taming the text. So in some cases, let's look at just the concepts first. So aromatase inhibitor happens to look the same in the metathesaurus as in the text, but here, breast cancer, I mean, this is part of the problem with natural language, is that there are lots of synonyms for things, there are lots of different ways of saying the same thing. One thing mapping fluid ontology does, it normalizes that synonymy to the preferred term in the UMLS, which is breast carcinoma. And then the thing is here, treats, I put in caps to point out that it's not the word treats, it's this abstract relationship, some relationship between a therapy and a disorder. Left kind of is exactly not said, does it actually cure it, does it do something for it, ameliorate it, but you know, we take this as being, well, okay, it's roughly it treats it. And the thing is here, there's more of a normalization in the relations too, because nowhere in the text does it actually say treats. But if you know English, you know that what this really means is that the aromatase inhibitor is actually treating the breast cancer. So this, in a nutshell, is the core of really what I would say the contribution of this work is, in a practical way, doing this to a large amount of text at a level of accuracy that is useful. And this is, before I go on to more of Semantic MEDLINE, just a couple things for, I mean, they're fair questions to ask. Well, that's all well and good to do that, but you know, how good is it? And it's impossible to me. We have not taken a fair sample of the 23 million citations in MEDLINE by any means, and no one else has either or probably ever will. But we have evaluated, I don't know, probably, we've conducted probably 25 evaluations, I mean, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 1,000 sentences each time. And in order to try to, you know, get an idea of how good this actually is overall, we focused in on sort of two things. One, on a biomedical subdomain, because various subdomains have specialized vocabulary or specialized ways of saying things. And if you only look at one of them, you might be doing good in that, but not overall. So we've, I mean, fairly broadly, clinical treatment, genetic etiology of disease, and pharmacogenomics, the relationship of drugs to an individual's genome. And we've also focused some on linguistic structure. So regardless of the domain, we've looked at hypernymic predications. These are things like ibuprofen is a NSAID, so it tells you a hyponym, something lower scale, and something more general. So, well, that's a perfect example. Ibuprofen belongs to this class of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Comparatives, ibuprofen is more effective than aspirin for this nominalizations, treatment of headache with ibuprofen. So, and now overall, for almost all, I mean, precision has varied somewhat. It can be as high as 95% for the predicate drug treating disease. But, you know, where other things bring it down, especially molecular biology, which is very difficult to get the gene structure right and get the exact interaction of all sorts of substances in a long, complicated sentence. But overall, precision is about 75%. That is, if we retrieve a predication, there's a good 75% chance that it's correct, in that a human would say, yeah, this is what the sentence says. And then recall, that is, what the text does say that SEMREP is familiar with, how much of it does it get, and that's lower, about 60%. But I've always figured, you know, just as in life, you should really go more for precision than recall. So if you're in a class, for example, and you're asked a question, I mean, you're far better, if you don't know the answer, you're better off to just sit quietly rather than jump up and make a fool of yourself. So that's kind of what SEMREP does. So another thing, so in practical sense, is we have processed all of MEDLINE, which is more than 23 million citations, and that we sort of do this every 3 months or so. The last time we did it was at the end of November, and we extracted 68 million predications, and we make these available to the research community right now as a MySQL database with some work instigated by George. We've been working with Yark Data, the Cray spinoff, that has created a graph-specific machine called the Eureka, and we've translated that into, so we've translated this, both MEDLINE and the predications, into about 2.2 billion RDF triples, but for technical details, they're not quite ready to just be made generally available, but it's very close to that happening. So let's go back now then to Semantic MEDLINE. Let's say we're understanding the workhorse, the core, you know, the engine of what's really happening is extracting of predications. So how can you use that? I mean, predications themselves, in and of themselves, are basically an aspect of linguistic basic research. But when semantic medline, or SEMED as I'll call it here, gets involved, this is what happens. So remember, you have all this text, whatever text you got from your text retrieval engine, in this case PubMed, it sort of extracts all the predications that it can from that. And I want to point out just that they have a breadth to them that no one else really that does this kind of work has. So we have both clinical kinds of things and more basic research, biology, molecular pathophysiology, I mean, things like genes associated with, genes stimulating. So is one thing to notice there. Another thing to notice that everything that is asserted in a text is not sort of created equally, as it were. Some things are more useful than other things. Some things that aren't too useful are asserted for rhetorical reasons, to sort of make the story coherent. But so tamoxifen treats patients. If you know at all what tamoxifen is, you know that it treats patients, and you know it's not valuable to have that sort of cluttering up your representation of this text. Breast carcinoma is a process of an individual, again, not too valuable. So what we do, I talked about summarization. So we send all the predications that are extracted first to a summarization process which works only on the predication. So it's what's called abstractive semantic summarization rather than textual summarization. So it kind of works with the meaning, not with the text. So it takes all the predications through a process of reduction. It then spits out, produces only the salient predications. And how it does that is you specify a topic, because there may be, depending on how you think about it, in any collection of text, there's really many topics that you might be interested in. So you specify which one you're particularly interested in. The system retains predications on that topic using a sort of meta-predications or a schema which we need to define, although we are working on statistical methods for not needing that. And then it eliminates the uninformative predications and does some really frequency of occurring processing, because usually the things that are right on topic are more frequently mentioned, or things in that area. So it does that, and then it sort of tells you, oh, these are the most useful, salient ones. These are the ones that you can look at if you want to, but if you're looking for a summary, you just ignore them. So the next step in the semantic medline is that we take those most useful, most salient, and we represent them as a graph, which for most people, I think, it's easier to see connections. I mean, this is simplified, but nevertheless, the point is made, I think, that this CDKN1A gene is, connected both with breast cancer and with this BARD1 gene. So if you have those alphabetized or listed by predicate or something, there's many connections you wouldn't see. So then the user gets involved in a sort of a process that I'm calling cooperative reciprocity. So the machine produces something, and then the human, says, oh, well, my 2 cents with it is that I'm interested, out of all these things, I'm interested in treating, and tamoxifen treats breast cancer. So then it goes back to the system, and in a sense it's maintained connections with the text from which that predication was extracted. It pulls them up, and you can read them the full, you can hear the citation, or this is Medline, so you can go to the full text if it's available. And then the human, and very crucially, and say this is a way of enhancing your thinking. It's not a way of doing your thinking for you, but it's sort of it's like any tool. The tool just doesn't do stuff. It sort of helps you in what you're planning to do. So this sort of cartoonish aspect to represent the fact that the researcher then goes and does her thinking is crucial to this whole process. So before I give a demo, I want to just point out a couple things about Semantic Medline, the web application. So in a nutshell, I think its core characteristic that we can exploit and that we need, and that goes beyond purely processing tokens without meaning, is that it provides an overview. I'm going to concentrate on research, but it provides an overview of any kind of text that you've retrieved. And so it lets you make or see salient, or in the sense of useful connections that you would likely miss without it. I mean, I think this is really the core aspect of what it does, that when you're inundated with a lot of information, it sort of makes connections that might be useful to you. It suggests, I think you should look at this, but it doesn't tell you, it doesn't say, oh, this is the answer. It's for you to figure that out. I crucially have to make that point. And so with that capability, what it allows you to do, it can help guide your thinking. This is the thinking about solving a problem before you actually spend a lot of time and resources gathering possibly supportive evidence, but possibly evidence that won't be useful. So it's a way of kind of getting on top of a complicated project before you actually devote a lot of energy and resources to actually, you know, say either trying to prove or disprove it. The system doesn't do that. So just to point out a couple of things we have already done with this, at NIH, we have a slightly modified version of what I'm going to show you. It does about the same thing, but it's meant to, it processes NIH grant applications rather than Medline citations, and it has some features added to facilitate portfolio analysts, people who are looking, I mean, for various reasons in the Office of the Director. It is, you know, where is NIH spending its money? Where should it be spending its money? Where is research headed? Where should it be headed? This sort of thing. We also worked with National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute in developing a system for them. It's a modified version of Semantic MEDLINE that I'm going to show you, but it does essentially the same thing, in helping them to find the literature needed to support clinical practice guideline development. So it was crucial there that we emphasize recall, because they really need to have everything that could possibly be relevant. I mentioned earlier, really with George's sort of at behest and help, we have been collaborating with YARC data, and we have ported Semantic MEDLINE to a Eureka graph machine, and as sort of part of the big data initiative, and we're still polishing this, and I mean, to where it's ready for just a user to just go in, you know, untrained and start to use it, but that is coming. But what I want to concentrate on today is something a little bit more abstract in the way that this can be used to facilitate biomedical basic research. So some things that Semantic MEDLINE can do, maybe more, but it can help with a process called literature-based discovery. So this is before you were in the wet lab, before you were running experiments, costly. You generate hypotheses about things that might be valuable to look at. Something, and often, and there have been in several papers, one that we have published on the connection between the testosterone and degraded sleep in aging males, and we determined really that cortisol, which is something that hypes you up, and there's two things that no one had really noticed. The sleep people knew about, of course, talk about testosterone and sleep, but they didn't talk about testosterone and cortisol. So the people involved in that knew and said that testosterone inhibits cortisol. And then the geriatrics people mentioned the fact that cortisol, as testosterone declines in age, and in men, we only looked at men because women, it's a more complicated system. Evidently, it's not that simple. But cortisol increases as you age in both men and women. But evidently, females they don't have as much testosterone. They don't usually have significant sleep problems, at least compared to men. And so I don't know how it actually works. But pulling together the fact of testosterone in sleep and cortisol in sleep had never been done by any one person. So we published that, having learned it from Semantic MEDLINE, and got it published in the journal Sleep, which is not an informatics journal, but a research and clinical journal in the area of sleep. So another thing that we're looking at is something that's not really meant to discover something, but it's discovery browsing. So you sort of get on top of a topic, know as much about a topic as experts in the field do. And this is really, I'll give an example of that today. Another thing, as I mentioned, that NIH is interested in is both a trend analysis, so analyzing medications to sort of help discern trends. Where is research headed? Or to guide trends, where should it be headed? I mean, that's kind of like extrapolation, saying, oh, the trend has been here, but we think, as being NIH, we would like to put our resources here in order to see that things move in that direction. So, but what I'm going to tell really is a type of discovery browsing. So, and I'm going to look in the area of cancer therapy. So, I mean, all of this is really sort of known, but just to set the scene, you know, with some exceptions, therapy in cancer is not effective. There's just really no way you can get around that. And that at its core, if you look in Medline, which I have done, chemotherapy, for example, really hasn't progressed significantly in 60 years. I mean, both chemotherapy and radiation therapy. I mean, I think the main progression in chemotherapy is that the drugs don't make you quite as sick as they used to. And in radiation therapy, you don't need quite as, you don't need as heavy doses, and it doesn't destroy as much tissue as it used to. But, I mean, they've just been sort of incremental improvements in 60 years. There's been really no breakthrough. And the scientific basis for this therapy, it's not really based on a knowledge, any deep knowledge of what really is going on with cancer. I mean, that's the problem. All it's doing is killing cancer cells. But recently, I mean, the thing is, people have understood it's not just a matter of cancer coming in and cancer cells being bad. I mean, they are, of course, but the main reason they're bad is because they interact with the body, with the normal cells of the body, of the immune system especially, and they subvert the immune system for their own purposes. And if they didn't do that, all cancer, some of these researchers say, would be benign. I mean, tumors would not grow and would not spread and would not metastasize. But the thing is, figuring out the exact details of how that works is beginning to get some attention. And it seems like it's a good thing that it is, because the immune system, of course, is sort of tied in with inflammation. I mean, the immune system causes inflammation as part of the fight against invaders or stress, trauma. And this connection was noted in, you know, the mid-19th century by this German physician, Virchow, but, you know, really, nothing has been done about that until recently, because no one could really tell what should they do about it. If you look at Medline in the 50s or something, I think there'd be a lot of discussion about how you should, if you're a physician, you should be careful not to diagnose inflammation as cancer, but them not sort of realizing that it was the same thing. They weren't really making use of this in a molecular pathophysiological way. So this demo is in the context that so immunotherapy, that is looking at the immune system as a therapy for cancer, is gaining in popularity. I mean, the last issue of 2013 of Science, they named immunotherapy as the therapy of the year. They award that kind of an Oscar. But kind of interesting. It's certainly, I mean, when you look at it, what they are talking about is taking a particular type of immune system cell, and the ones that do kill cancer cells, but taking them out of the body and changing them, and then putting them back in so that they'll kill cancer cells. But this is only one part of the issue. It's not really, that type of research really doesn't advance our knowledge of the complicated system that cancer really is, in the way it's interacting and subverting innocent cells in the body. So there's plenty of work yet to be done, and what I want to do in the demo is to sort of, after we're going to discover stuff, we're going to find out things in Medline about what's being done in that area. And I just flashed this up before I move to the demo, just to give some acknowledgement to the people that are currently on my team. I mean, two things I think to note here is that it's a very small team and it's a very diverse team. So we have physicians. I think everyone has an advanced degree and PhDs in computer science, linguistics, which I have, and library science and medical informatics. So with that, though, let me move to the demo. And I should point out, the system, the system I'm showing you, is available to anyone who is willing to sign the UMLS license agreement, which is free, and it just means that you won't, that some of the component vocabularies, I don't remember exactly which one, CPT maybe, and a few others, I mean, you can't use them for commercial purposes unless you pay a licensing fee to those. But this, for research, you can. So I point out, too, if you want to go to the SKR3 webpage, this shows you about my whole research project. But you can go to Semantic MEDLINE, and you can click here to get to the actual system. So let me sign in. So this is the first page that comes up on Semantic MEDLINE. It has sort of 2 pages. The first is really, you can type in any valid PubMed query. And really, if you know PubMed, you can do some fancier things. But really, if you don't, you just essentially type in, what you would to Google. So in this case, we don't have to really know the details that we're looking for. We're just going to sort of say common sense-wise, I'm interested in inflammation and cancer. And you can tell, you could sequester this by date or how many. It gives you, by default, it gives you the 500 most recent citations from the time we have the last update that we have extracted predications. So one does that, and the citations are returned, and you could look at them here, but that would really just be PubMed. What we're interested in is looking at summarization. Now, I didn't really, in the amount of time, I didn't have time to say much about how summarization works, and I still won't, but I do need to point out, I mentioned that you choose a topic, and I didn't talk about, you sort of need to choose a point of view, as it were. So, I mean, obviously, cancer is a good example. I mean, you might be interested in treatment of cancer. You might be interested in the epidemiology of cancer. You might be interested in the underlying molecular pathophysiology. And we have various sort of these schemas for addressing these various points of view that you're interested in. One is treatment, which we'll start with. And then I talked about us doing frequency of occurrence. So if you want the real tight executive summary where you've only given the most frequent predication, you don't check this. But if you want a few more, a little bit more depth, you check it. And then here is the topic. So these are Medline citations. I'm sorry, I'm kind of coming off of a cold, so so this suggests topics that the system has extracted from the predications for this text and put them in here by frequency of occurrence. Not surprisingly, inflammation is at the top. So we're going to keep that, and we'll be looking then at a summary of the predications extracted from these 500 citations, which have to do with treating inflammation. But remember, the texts talk about inflammation in the context of cancer. So we say summarize, that creates these 79 predications. We then say visualize, that produces the graph. And, I mean, there's documentation which tells you kind of how to get around this. But the core characteristics of the graph are that the predications are represented as these nodes and arcs where the predicate is color coordinated. So you can see here, this green is location of. So it says, or you read this as inflammation has location, colon. Here, this darker green are coexists with. So it says, aggressive cancer here coexists with inflammation. Here we have the blue is, as we see up here, is treats. So we have anti-inflammatory agents treat inflammation. So just to give you an idea of how to read the graph, but how you might actually use it, although this graph is probably usable, we can make it a little bit smaller by saying, well, I want to kind of filter it by looking only at coexists with. So when I do that, then I see various things that inflammation coexists with, and some of them are sort of well known now, but atherosclerosis, but inflammatory response, but there's a fair number of them here. I mean, because in this text of carcinoma, carcinogenesis, malignant neoplasm of breast, aggressive cancer, primary carcinoma of the liver, neoplasms. So we can then say, well, let's see what these say. So if we click here on the arc, this pulls up the citation from which that predication was extracted, and it lists in orange the sentence from which that was extracted. So it says here, lung carcinogenesis and investigate the association of circulating inflammation markers with lung cancer. So what I want to kind of do is we're going to look at, I think, 4 citations, and just from these 4 citations, sort of, not, I mean, I'm a linguist, certainly not an oncology or biology researcher, but if we kind of keep track of what we get from these, we get an overview of where the current state of the art in research underpinning the pathophysiology of cancer with respect to the body's own cells. So the first thing that says you might be skeptical about whether there really is any connection between inflammation and cancer. But here is the type of study that it's hard to ignore. So it's basically an epidemiological study, and you can go through the details are given. They did lots of statistical backup, but they looked at 526 lung cancer patients and 592 control patients, and they measured various what they call inflammatory markers. I mean, there's various things that they marked that we could look. You could look at read the details, but they point out that their result was that they say with high statistical probability, they say in this text here, that some circulating inflammation markers are associated with prospective lung cancer risk. So there's kind of, this seems very compelling to say, yeah, there's really is some kind of a connection in the real world. So seeing that, actually there were 2 citations here. The next thing we might want to say is, oh, well, what is that? What is that? Did I get that one? Let's see. Oh, so I want this next predication, because now we have sort of, in a sense, even common sense. Epidemiological evidence that there is an association. Now we can look at some of the details. So one of the detail is that it says inflammation is involved in regulation of cellular events in prostate carcinogenesis through control of the tumor microenvironment. Well, what is that microenvironment? Well, we're not really sort of going to get into the details here, but there is something we have to know. Nuclear factor kappa beta is a so-called transcription factor. That is, it goes into the DNA and regulates sort of which genes are expressed and what they do. And in this case, if we read this all, we'd see that this is involved with, this nuclear factor kappa beta is involved with cytokines, which are the sort of core signaling aspect, chemicals, of the immune system. So cytokines, as we're going to see in just a minute, we say, okay, well, let's take this a little bit further. Now let's look at the research that is more involved with the core biology, molecular and cellular function mechanisms. So let's summarize by excuse me, substance interactions. And notice, lo and behold, cytokine is the most popular topic here. So we choose it, and we summarize, and then we visualize, and we get a quite useful, nice little graph, which, by the way, you can, if the nodes are overlapping, you can move them a little bit so it's a little bit more readable. But we see in a graph theory that, I mean, it's rather interesting that nuclear factor kappa B and cytokines are highly sort of connected here, so they're very important in this topic, with cytokine being the most important. So we start to look at some of these. We look at here this green. If we look up here, is effects So cytokine affects cytokine signaling, and we go and look at the citation. And we see, again, more evidence that from very recent study that circulating soluble cytokine receptors. So, I mean, chemicals go up to a cell, and the way they hook up to the cell is because of these receptors that will only take that one chemical. So the soluble interleukin, the interleukins are a type of cytokine, a type of signaling molecule, and the receptors, so if you antagonize them, that is, don't let them grab onto their host, of pro-inflammatory cytokines can modify cytokine signaling and may affect cancer risk.
Tom, can I ask you?
Yes.
Is that the one you create, the orange color? What does the orange color mean?
That means that the predication was extracted from that. I mean, sometimes it doesn't get it quite right, but let's see. Well, it does say soluble cytokine receptors and receptor antagonists, the pro-inflammatory cytokines, can modify cytokine signaling. So this modify is a little bit more general, or a more specific way of saying affects. So this, it does, in fact, it says other things too, but it at least says that, well, strictly speaking, sometimes it gets it right for the wrong reasons. I mean, this strictly doesn't say that the cytokines modify the cytokine signaling. It says that the soluble cytokine receptors and the receptor antagonists of the cytokines modify it. And you actually, this is one characteristic of this type of linguistic processing. I mean, sometimes it gets stuff totally wrong, but often it gets you sort of close enough that it's not, you wouldn't use this as a statement in your evidence, but I said its purpose is to sort of put you in the ballpark, and this is a typical case of that, where it's close, but, it's not, so it's close, but not exactly the same thing. But this is what you can sort of pretty much expect, is that the natural language processing will not be perfect. I take it as being, our goal here is, I mean, I don't know what I say. I mean, it's kind of like working with humans in a way. I mean, in that rarely do you work with somebody who never makes a mistake. I mean, it's just humans make mistakes, right? But nevertheless, you can work with them, and you sort of negotiate, and you say, well, that's close, but not quite. And that's sort of what you have to do here. It is in a way, it's not maybe what you expect from a computer. You expect a computer to give you an exact answer. But the point is, if you want to go beyond, but that's of limited usefulness. I mean, it's useful, but we're now trying to go beyond that. So when you get into semantics and natural language, you need to expect this kind of thing.
Article itself might not be perfect.
Well, that's right, and that's the other thing is too. Many people mention that the article may in fact be wrong. I mean, it could be. The researchers may not have used a good practice. There may be something that has been debunked by a bunch of other researchers. So it's meant to contribute to your thinking, not to give you evidence that this is God's truth. So yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think let's we have just a couple minutes. Here are two of the major cytokines in the immune system: interleukin 1B and interleukin 6. And now we see here that not only are they involved with wound healing, but they are involved with cancer activation as well. We've already seen that citation, but here it brings in a new notion of this inflammasome, another chemical which sort of controls interleukin 1B and another one, interleukin 18. And these, again, have been implicated in the relationship between tumor genesis, progression, and inflammation. Looking at interleukin 6, we see the same thing. Look at this one. So here we see an interesting thing. We bring in another connection. There's been some notion that obesity is related to cancer, but the evidence or sort of the argumentation of why that is true up until recently is quite elusive. But here we see that, yes, it all sort of fits together as one story. So obesity is dangerous for cancer because adipose tissue, visceral adipose tissue, have demonstrated to induce a chronic inflammatory condition predisposing the liver to a proto-tumorigenic milieu. And these cytokines, such as IL-6, another one we didn't mention, are secreted from the adipose tissue. The more you have of it, the more you secrete of this IL-6, which is a highly pro-inflammatory cytokine. So, sort of in conclusion, we could say that just, very easily, without having a degree or years of medical school, we can sort of see that where the current state of the art in immunology and cancer therapy, we see that, there's epidemiological evidence. We see that the key components are cytokines, the signaling molecules, and the transcription factor, nuclear factor kappa B, and this inflammasome, which is another chemical that sort of regulates helps to regulate the cytokines, and that these, and sort of more evidence, because adipose tissue, it secretes IL-6, we see that what happens is that the cancer cell, is working with the immune system in ways that are not completely understood, but we kind of understand who the players are. I mean, I have to think of this, if you're invaded by a foreign army, I mean, it's one thing to kill off as many of the soldiers as you can, but what happens here, this is a more insidious army than often you get, because the invaders come in, and the way they succeed is by subverting, the local citizens, and they get the citizens to do their dirty work for them. So we know, sort of what we know here right now is which citizens are involved, but we don't yet know exactly what they're doing or exactly how the cancer cells are getting them to do this stuff. But we're, I think, moving in the right direction to sort of understand the underpinnings of cancer, will provide us with a much firmer platform for actually attacking it for good, rather than skirting around the edges with merely killing cancer cells. Because inflammation is responsible for all the nasty business the cancer does, for the fact that it won't die, the fact that it proliferates forever, the fact that it causes angiogenesis, new growth of blood vessels without which it couldn't live, and for metastasis and invasion of other organs.
Tom, you've given us the view of a non-specialist getting an overview. I suspect this same material would be helpful for specialists to expand their view beyond the narrow scope of literature that they normally read.
That's exactly right there. I think that's the idea, is that because the literature is so large, that very few people can keep up with sort of stuff outside of their very specialty, and I think that's why science is really only progressing sort of incrementally rather than making great leaps, because people, they can't see everything that everybody else is doing.
This could get you out of your silo of excellence.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Exactly. So I'll be happy to take any other questions.